If you asked 10 Christians how the apostles died, you'd probably hear confident answers, said with love, passion, and certainty. Crucified upside down, skinned alive, boiled in oil, thrown to lions. It's powerful, it's dramatic, it feels right because these men were faithful to the end. But what if some of those details come from later stories, told centuries after the apostles lived? What if the earliest sources say less, and what they do say is simpler, humbler, and sometimes different from the tales that stuck in our memory? In the next few minutes, I want to walk with you through 7 popular myths about the deaths of the apostles. I'll do it gently, with respect for tradition, but with a commitment to what the earliest evidence actually tells us. My goal is not to tear down anyone's faith. My goal is to strengthen it by showing how truth and reverence can live together. Before we begin, here's the approach. When I say earliest sources, I'm talking about the New Testament and the first generations after it, writers in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries who were closer in time to the apostles than we are. When a detail shows up much later, say half a millennium after the apostles, it may still carry devotional value, but historically it becomes harder to verify. That doesn't mean it's false. It means we should hold it with humility. Keep that in mind as we go, because you're going to feel the tension between the stories we love and the sources we have. Let's start with the biggest claim you'll hear in church conversations and even in some books, that all 12 apostles were martyred. It's a stirring idea, but the earliest evidence does not strictly say that every single one was killed for the faith. The New Testament itself only records one apostle's martyrdom explicitly, James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of John, executed by Herod Agrippa. Scripture also reports Judas's death, though the details differ in the accounts. For Peter and Paul, early Christian writers very consistently remember their executions in Rome, and those traditions are strong. But when it comes to John, the oldest memories are that he lived to old age and died in Ephesus, not as a martyr. For others like Andrew, Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew, traditions do exist, but they vary in date and detail. So can we say many of the apostles met violent ends for Christ? Yes. Can we say with historical precision that all of them did? The earliest sources don't go that far. That's a crucial distinction, and it already helps us separate what's firm from what's heartfelt but less certain. Now let's talk about Peter. You have likely heard that he was crucified upside down in Rome because he didn't feel worthy to die in the same way as Jesus. The part about Rome under Nero comes from early and multiple witnesses, and it's compelling. The upside-down detail, though, is not in the earliest layer. It appears later, woven into devotional memory and teaching. Does that make it false? Not necessarily. It does mean the historical confidence we have in Peter's location and manner of death, crucifixion in Rome, is stronger than our confidence in the specific posture of the cross. People sometimes feel disappointed hearing that. But to me, it's still moving. The heart behind the story, that Peter saw his Lord's death as beyond his worthiness, is entirely consistent with what we know of his character, even if the upside-down detail can't be nailed down with first-century evidence. So the fair takeaway is this: Peter's martyrdom in Rome is well attested early. The upside-down part is a later and beloved tradition. What about Paul? You've probably heard that he was thrown to wild beasts. That image is vivid. It fits our imagination of Roman persecution. But the earlier and more consistent memory is that Paul was beheaded, which would align with his status as a Roman citizen. Beheading was seen as a quicker, more honorable form of execution compared to crucifixion or the arena. Again, this doesn't make the arena imagery useless. It speaks to the brutality Christians faced, collectively, in those years. But when we're talking about Paul himself, the best supported account points to beheading, likely in Rome, in the wake of the same climate that took Peter. Now we turn to a story that almost every churchgoer has heard: John being thrown into a vat of boiling oil and miraculously surviving. It's a dramatic miracle narrative, and it shows up in later sources, along with the well-known exile to the island of Patmos. The exile piece is early and steady. The boiling oil episode, however, doesn't appear in the earliest layer and is not as secure historically. It doesn't mean God couldn't have done it. It doesn't mean John wasn't preserved by providence. It simply means that if we're ranking the reliability, John on Patmos is much earlier and firmer, while the oil story comes later and cannot be verified with the same confidence. The enduring portrait of John as the last surviving apostle, dying in old age, teaching the next generation in Ephesus, remains a strong thread in early Christian memory. That portrait stands even if the oil story belongs to the realm of cherished tradition rather than documented history. Let's visit Thomas, because this one touches living communities and deserves careful attention. Many Christians in India proudly trace their spiritual lineage to the Apostle Thomas, often called the Apostle of India. This tradition is not a modern invention. It has early roots and remarkable persistence, and the presence of ancient Christian communities on the subcontinent is a serious historical fact. So, did Thomas go to India? It is certainly plausible and supported by long, early, and continuous memory. The part we must handle carefully is how exactly he died and where the martyrdom occurred. Some accounts point to Mylapore and speak of a spear. Others vary in the details. The stories that describe the precise death scene are much later than Thomas himself. So the balanced conclusion is this: Thomas's connection to India is a venerable and early tradition that deserves respect. The precise how and where of his death rests on later narratives that don't all agree. If your faith community treasures the Thomas in India heritage, honor it. The question for historians is not whether Indian Christianity is real, it is, but how tightly we can tie a specific martyrdom scene to the historical Thomas. On that, humility is wise. Bartholomew's story brings us to one of the most graphic images in Christian art, flaying alive. You've seen sculptures and paintings where Bartholomew holds his own skin or a knife. These images are powerful and unforgettable. But when we search the earliest strata of tradition, the flaying detail is hard to pin down. There are multiple later legends about where Bartholomew traveled. Armenia is common, but other locations appear, and how he died. The stories conflict. The gory detail that dominates later iconography seems to come from those later layers rather than the earliest testimony. Again, that doesn't make devotion meaningless. It means the historical bottom line is this: Bartholomew is remembered as a missionary and a martyr in tradition, but the specific manner of being flayed is not supported by the earliest sources we can verify. James the Just, the brother of the Lord, presents a different kind of challenge. Early writers agree that he was a righteous pillar in Jerusalem and that he was martyred there. The tension is in the how. Some accounts say he was cast down from a height and then beaten. Others emphasize stoning. A later retelling may add or emphasize details in a way that reflects theological or community concerns at the time of writing. What can we say with confidence? James the Just died as a martyr in Jerusalem. What can't we fix with precision? Every step of the method. The sources differ, and each version has its own perspective and date. The wise approach is to honor James's witness, treat the broad picture as solid, and hold the specific choreography of his death with care. Let's pause and ask a simple but important question. What does the New Testament actually tell us for sure? It tells us explicitly that James the son of Zebedee was executed. It gives us accounts of Judas's tragic end, though the reports differ in how that unfolded. Beyond that, the New Testament does not record the deaths of the other apostles. That silence is not proof that they were safe, nor is it proof that every later tradition is wrong. It is simply silence. It pushes us to rely on the earliest post-New Testament witnesses if we want to learn more. And when we do, we find strong lines for some figures and thinner threads for others. That's the nature of ancient history. It often gives us outlines, not photographs. So why do these myths persist? Partly because unforgettable stories travel faster than careful footnotes. Medieval art etched certain images into the Christian imagination. Preachers and storytellers pass on what moves the heart, and honestly, we often prefer a neat ending. It feels right that every apostle died a dramatic martyr's death. It feels worthy of their love for Christ. But history rarely lines up in perfectly symmetrical rows. The apostles were faithful, of that there is no doubt. But the exact details of each death remain to us through traditions layered over centuries. If we can love the apostles, love the Lord they served, and still tell the truth about what we know and what we don't, our faith becomes more resilient, not less. Let me give you a lightning-round portrait that keeps both reverence and reality in view. Peter and Paul, executed in Rome, early, strong, and consistent traditions. Peter's upside-down crucifixion, a later and cherished detail. Paul's death by beheading, earlier and more probable than the arena and the beasts. John, remembered as dying in old age, teacher of the next generation in Ephesus. Exile to Patmos, early and firm. Boiling oil, a later miracle story. Thomas, a respected and early tradition links him to India. Precise martyrdom scene varies in later accounts. Bartholomew, missionary and martyr in tradition, but the famous flaying detail is linked to later legends and iconography. James the Just, martyred in Jerusalem with differing early descriptions of method. Others, Andrew, Matthew, Luke, and more, have traditions that are meaningful and may reflect true memories, but the earliest documentation is uneven, and the details often shift across time and place. How should we weigh all this as ordinary believers who love Scripture and also value truth? Start by asking 3 simple questions whenever you hear a claim. First, what is the earliest source for this claim, and how close is it to the events described? Second, do multiple independent early witnesses agree, or is this coming from a single stream much later? Third, is there a tendency in the story toward elaboration over time, details becoming more dramatic as the distance from the events grows? These questions don't require a theology degree. They require patience and a willingness to honor both faith and facts. You can love a tradition's spiritual message and still be honest about its historical footing. This is not about deflating heroism. The apostles were courageous beyond words. They left family and safety to carry the news of Jesus into a world that often pushed back hard. Some were without doubt killed for that witness. Others may have died quietly after decades of service. The point isn't to demand a sensational death to prove a faithful life. The point is to see that Christ's power shows in both the storm and the steady day. If Peter died on a cross and Paul by the sword, their courage speaks for itself. If John died in old age, after shepherding churches and writing letters of love and truth, his courage also speaks. Differently, but no less truly. Faithfulness isn't measured only by the violence of your end, it's measured by the endurance of your obedience. There's also a pastoral reason to handle this topic gently. People inherit stories from parents, pastors, and teachers they deeply respect. If you strip those stories away harshly, you can leave someone feeling mocked or destabilized. But if you invite them into the process, if you say, here's what we know for sure, here's what strong early traditions say, and here's what later devotion adds, you help them build a faith that's both trusting and discerning. The Bible remains central. The early church remains precious. Later tradition remains part of our family album, sometimes a candid shot, sometimes a painted portrait. We can appreciate the whole album while noting which pieces are photographs and which are artistic renderings. Another important point is that later stories often grow around truths that are absolutely real. Christians were persecuted. Martyrdom was a grim reality across centuries. The instinct to attach that reality to specific apostles in a dramatic way is understandable. But history asks for specificity. When we have it, we celebrate it. When we lack it, we say so with humility. This habit of honesty doesn't drain our reverence. It protects it. Because reverence anchored to reality will last. If you're still with me, I'd like you to test this approach on your own. The next time you hear a claim about an apostle's death, try to place it on a timeline in your head. Ask yourself, is this something the New Testament states? Is it something a 2nd century writer records? Or does it show up mainly in medieval collections? You don't need to memorize names and dates to do this. Just practice the reflex. Nearer in time is usually stronger historically. Multiple early voices outweigh a single late one. And when accounts differ, say, we don't know the details, but we honor the witness. That sentence is a friend to both scholarship and devotion. At this point, you might be wondering, does any of this really matter if the end result is the same? The apostles preached Christ. The church grew. Why sweat the details? Here's why. Telling the truth honors God. It also inoculates us against cynicism. When we admit what we don't know, skeptics have less to weaponize. When we are careful with our claims, our stronger claims stand taller. If someone challenges the upside-down cross, we can say, fair. That part isn't first century, but Peter's death in Rome under Nero is early and widely attested. If someone raises the oil story, we can say the exile to Patmos is early, the boiling oil is later, and so on. This steadies our witness and shows that Christian faith can carry both spiritual conviction and historical caution without falling apart. There is also a spiritual gift in messy history. Untidy details remind us that God works through real people in real time, not through tidy legends alone. The apostles were not comic book heroes. They were complicated, courageous, sometimes frightened men who followed Jesus through shipwrecks, prisons, councils, and lonely roads. The variety in their endings mirrors the variety in their lives. Some were cut down quickly, some endured long and quiet service. All were held by the same Lord. Your story might not end with fireworks either. It might be 1,000 small obediences over many years. That too is holy. Let me draw this together with a simple summary you can carry. Many apostles likely died as martyrs. The Bible records one explicitly. Peter and Paul in Rome, strong early tradition. Peter upside down, later tradition, beloved but not first layer evidence. Paul in lions, dramatic image but beheading better fits the earliest testimony. John, old age at Ephesus is early and steady. Exile to Patmos early, boiling oil later and uncertain. Thomas in India, early and persistent tradition of mission. Exact details of death vary and are later. Bartholomew flayed, powerful in art but not supported by the earliest sources. Traditions about location and manner conflict. James the Just, martyred in Jerusalem, details differ between early reports. Hold what's early with greater confidence, what's later with humility, and honor the apostles for their faithfulness either way. If this conversation has made you curious rather than discouraged, that's a good sign. Curiosity is faith looking for accuracy. It's love for the saints that also loves the truth. I encourage you to keep reading, keep asking, and keep that gentle posture that says, I can cherish tradition and still test it. The apostles don't need us to embellish their courage. A plain, unvarnished account of their faithfulness is more than enough to inspire ours. I'd like to end with a word to anyone who feels uneasy right now, because the stories you've heard your whole life mean a lot to you. Please hear this. Honoring the saints includes telling their stories as honestly as we can. It does not dishonor them to say we're not sure about that detail. It doesn't shrink their legacy. It right-sizes our certainty, and it refocuses our eyes on what truly matters. The Christ they loved, the gospel they carried, and the church they helped shape with their lives, their words, and yes, in many cases, their blood. If this episode helped you see the difference between early evidence and later legend, I'd love to hear which myth surprised you most. Did the upside-down cross catch you off guard? Did the beheading of Paul make more sense than the arena? Did the living memory of Thomas in India encourage you to explore that story more deeply? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and your insights often shape what I make next. If you value careful, respectful history told in plain English, please hit like so this reaches more people. Share it with your Bible study group or that friend who loves church history. And if you want a follow-up where we dig into Andrew, Matthew, Luke, and a few others whose stories are rich but less certain, tell me, and I'll make it. Finally, if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this series. In the next one, we'll ask what really happened to Pontius Pilate and the Herods after the New Testament. Until then, may your faith be brave, your curiosity honest, and your love for the truth unshakable.